She worked quietly at the restaurant, moving between tables with practiced ease. Her steps were soft, her movements smooth, so she rarely drew attention to herself. She had been doing this job for years, and most people around her barely noticed her. The regular customers recognized her as the friendly waitress who always smiled politely, took orders efficiently, and never caused trouble. Yet, behind her calm exterior, there was a world of dreams and feelings that no one could see. She carried herself with humility, never wanting to attract attention, even though inside her heart, music was her life. From the moment she had learned to play the piano as a child, music had been her closest companion. Every note had been a friend, every melody a confidant. Her fingers had once danced over keys with passion and precision, filling rooms with sound that made people stop and listen. But life had a way of shifting priorities, and she had been forced to put her piano aside. Money had to be earned, bills had to be paid, and dreams, no matter how bright, often had to wait. She had put on her apron and stepped into the world of serving tables, smiling while her heart quietly longed for the touch of ivory keys dot at the restaurant. She knew every corner, every regular face, every routine. She had seen families grow, heard countless stories over the clatter of plates and the hum of conversation. Yet no one truly saw her beyond the uniform she wore. Some nights, when the restaurant was quiet and the only sound was the soft music from the background piano, she would stand near it, her fingers itching, her heart aching. She remembered the thrill of performing, the way music made her forget everything else in the world. But those moments were fleeting and private, hidden behind the doors of the kitchen and the dining hall. Her colleagues knew her as the dependable one. She never complained, never demanded praise, and rarely spoke about herself. She laughed when appropriate, nodded when needed, and kept the rhythm of the restaurant flowing smoothly. She knew the orders of every table, the preferences of every regular, and the quirks of the staff. Yet, despite her quiet presence, she was invisible in the eyes of most. To them, she was simply a part of the background, a face in the sea of staff that kept the restaurant running. Still, she held onto her secret world of music. She would hum softly while stacking plates, tapping out rhythms on the edge of a tray, letting her mind wander to the melodies she had once played. In the tiny moments between taking orders and clearing tables, she imagined herself back at the piano, performing a piece she loved. She remembered the satisfaction of a perfectly executed chord, the rush of emotion that came from losing herself in a song, and the joy of creating something beautiful from nothing. Her love for music was not just a hobby. It was a part of who she was. It shaped her emotions, her thoughts, and her perspective on the world. Music gave her strength when days were long and tiring, a private escape from the demands of work and life. It reminded her that she was more than a waitress, more than a uniform and a job, that there was a depth to her that few had ever glimpsed. She carried that quietly, like a treasure hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right moment to show the world what she could do. She had always been careful to keep her musical past private. People admired talent, but they often judged or dismissed it when it didn't fit the expectations of their everyday world. She had learned to keep her abilities tucked away, sharing them only with herself and with the music she played in her imagination. Yet the longing never faded. Each day spent serving tables was also a day spent dreaming of the piano, of notes that flowed like water, and of the feeling of connecting with others through music. The restaurant itself was a grand place, frequented by wealthy patrons and socialites. It had polished wooden floors, soft lighting that gave the room a warm glow, and a stage where musicians sometimes performed live. The piano was always there, a majestic instrument that seemed to invite the touch of skilled hands. She often found herself lingering nearby when no one was watching, letting her fingers hover over the keys, imagining the music she could create. She could hear the notes in her head long before she ever played them, feeling the melodies in her chest, a reminder that she still had that spark, even if it was hidden. Her days were long and often exhausting. Orders came fast and furious during peak hours, and she had to navigate the crowded dining room with precision. She balanced trays of food and drinks, remembered complicated orders, and kept the customers satisfied. The work was demanding, but she handled it with grace, never letting frustration show. Her patience was remarkable, and her attention to detail made her reliable and respected among her peers. Yet, despite her competence and kindness, the world outside the kitchen seemed blind to her existence. She was always there, but never noticed in a way that mattered. Still, she found moments of quiet joy. When the lunch crowd thinned, or the evening rush subsided, she would take a moment to breathe, to listen, to feel. She would stand near the piano, let her hands hover above the keys, and imagine the music flowing through her once more. She remembered the hours she had spent practicing as a child, the dedication it took to learn each piece, the pride of mastering a complex melody. Those memories were precious, like fragments of a life that had not been entirely lost. A reminder that she was still capable of extraordinary things. Her colleagues often chatted about their lives, their plans, their weekend trips, or the latest gossip. She would smile, nodding along politely, but rarely shared her own thoughts. Her world was different, quieter, filled with music that others could not hear. She was content with observing, with listening, with finding satisfaction in the small, often unnoticed acts of her work. Yet inside, the music never stopped. It was always there, pulsing, waiting for a chance to emerge. At times, she felt a pang of loneliness. Watching others live lives that seemed full of excitement and recognition, she wondered if she would ever have her moment. She had talent, she had passion, and she had dedication, but it all seemed trapped behind the walls of the restaurant and the expectations of a life that demanded practicality over dreams. Still, she held on to hope, a quiet, persistent belief that one day her music might be heard by those who would truly see her. She did not seek fame or attention, only the chance to share a part of herself that had been hidden for so long. She dreamed of playing in front of an audience, of feeling the energy of people responding to her music, of connecting through sound in a way that transcended words. Yet she kept these dreams private, tucked away in the corners of her mind, letting them sustain her through the long hours and the repetitive work. Her love for music shaped the way she noticed the world. She heard rhythms in the chatter of diners, melodies in the clatter of dishes, and harmonies in the ebb and flow of conversation. Even in the busiest moments, her mind found patterns, small symphonies that others could not perceive. Music had trained her to observe, to listen, to understand the subtleties of life. It gave her a depth that was invisible to those around her, a richness that belonged only to her. Despite her quiet presence, there were glimpses of her true self. Sometimes a customer would compliment her on her efficiency or her cheerful demeanor, and she would respond with a modest smile, thanking them without revealing the depth of her inner world. There were moments when she caught herself tapping a rhythm on a table or quietly humming a tune, only to realize she had been lost in her own music. These moments were fleeting, yet they reminded her that she had not lost herself entirely, that the spark of her talent was still alive. The restaurant was her world, but it was also her stage in its own way. Every action she took, every step she made, was part of a rhythm, a choreography that kept the environment alive and welcoming. She moved through the space with a natural grace, unnoticed yet essential, like the quiet melody that underlies a song, subtle but indispensable. She had become attuned to the flow of the restaurant, anticipating needs, adjusting to changes, and maintaining a presence that was felt even if it was not acknowledged. She often wondered what it would feel like to be recognized, to have her abilities seen and appreciated. She imagined the joy of playing for an audience, the thrill of applause, and the sense of fulfillment that came from sharing her gift. Yet those were dreams for another life, one that seemed distant and almost unattainable. For now, she focused on her work, finding satisfaction in small victories and quiet moments, keeping her passion alive through imagination and memory. Her story was one of patience, resilience, and quiet perseverance. She existed in a world that often overlooked her, yet she carried herself with dignity and strength. Her love for music was a secret treasure, a part of her identity that could not be erased by the monotony of daily life. Each day she continued to serve, to smile, and to move gracefully through the restaurant. She was also keeping her dream alive, nurturing it in the hope that one day it might emerge and astonish the world. In this quiet existence, she found meaning. She observed, she learned, and she held on to her music with unwavering devotion. The piano was always there, a silent witness to her thoughts and dreams, waiting patiently for the moment when she would finally play again. And even though the world saw only the waitress, the truth was far more remarkable. Inside her was a musician whose talent and passion. The evening had started like any other, with the soft chatter of diners, the clinking of glasses, and the quiet hum of the restaurant's background music. She moved through the tables with her usual careful precision, taking orders, serving drinks, and offering polite smiles. The restaurant was more crowded than usual tonight because of a private event. A wealthy family had booked the space for a small party, and the staff was busier than ever. She felt the familiar rhythm of the work, the patterns of movement that had become second nature to her. Yet a subtle tension lingered in the air. Something about this night felt different, though she could not have said why. The head of the kitchen came rushing out, his face tight with concern. The pianist for the evening's event had called in sick. No one had a backup, and the guests were expected to arrive any moment. The manager's calm veneer slipped, replaced by a hint of panic. She saw him glance around the room, searching for a solution, and then, almost jokingly, he said, "Well, maybe our waitress can play a few tunes." The words made her freeze. All eyes turned toward her, and for a moment she felt the weight of every gaze. Laughter followed from some of the staff, assuming he was joking. She could feel the tension rising in her chest, a mix of fear, embarrassment, and a spark of something else she could not name. She had not played publicly in years, and yet the piano, waiting silently in the corner of the room, seemed to call to her. She tried to ignore it, telling herself she could not, would not, let herself be seen. Yet the words lingered in the air, hovering like a challenge. She hesitated, her hands gripping the edge of the tray she had been holding. The manager, realizing that no other option existed, glanced at her again, more seriously this time. The guests would arrive soon, and there needed to be music. The room seemed to shrink around her, filled with expectation she never wanted. Her heart raced, and for a moment she wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor and vanish from the worried stares and nervous laughter. Yet something inside her stirred. The memory of playing, the feeling of fingers gliding across keys, the thrill of music coursing through her veins, ignited a spark she had not felt in years. She took a shaky breath, trying to calm her racing heart. She did not think of the potential embarrassment, the possible laughter, or the uncertain outcome. She only thought of the piano, waiting patiently, and of the music that had always been a part of her. With a quiet step, she walked toward the piano, her apron brushing softly against her sides. She could feel the eyes following her, some curious, some doubtful, some amused. The staff whispered among themselves, and she could sense the skepticism in the air. A few guests, unaware of what had happened, were settling at their tables, chatting softly. She felt a lump in her throat, but pressed on, reaching the piano and sitting down on the bench. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly, But she reminded herself that the music was not about anyone else. It was about her. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting her mind drift back to the hours she had spent practicing as a child, to the afternoons spent learning the nuances of each piece, to the joy of mastering complex melodies. She remembered the feeling of connection she had always felt with the piano, the way it had understood her emotions when no one else could. The memory brought a sense of calm over her, a reassurance that she was capable, that she had always been capable. The manager stepped back, watching with a mix of curiosity and relief that someone had finally taken initiative. The staff fell silent, unsure of what to expect. The guests had not yet noticed the change, their conversations continuing softly. She drew in a deep breath and let her fingers settle on the keys. The first note she played was tentative, cautious, but it held a clarity that surprised even her. She felt the vibration of the sound beneath her fingers, a familiar comfort that reminded her why she had loved music so much. The second note followed, and then the third, each one more confident than the last. She allowed herself to feel the melody in her heart, to let the rhythm guide her fingers. Slowly, the music began to fill the room, soft at first, then swelling with emotion. The guests, hearing the piano for the first time that evening, turned their attention toward the source. The staff, who had been uncertain and amused moments ago, paused, caught off guard by the depth and beauty of the music. She lost herself in the moment, forgetting about the audience, the staff, the manager, and even the potential embarrassment. The piano had become an extension of herself, each key a word in a language only she fully understood. Her fingers moved with fluidity and grace, recalling years of training and passion that had never truly faded. The music spoke of longing and hope, of dreams deferred but not forgotten, of a quiet strength that had endured through years of invisibility. The murmurs of surprise began among the staff and guests. Some stopped mid-conversation, leaning forward, trying to understand where this talent had come from. Others whispered to one another, their expressions a mix of awe and disbelief. The sound was mesmerizing, filling the room in a way that silenced the usual clatter and chatter. She noticed none of it. She was immersed in the music, letting it flow naturally, letting it carry her away. As the piece continued, her confidence grew. She allowed herself to play with emotion, to let the dynamics rise and fall, to experiment with tempo and expression. She remembered the advice of her old teachers, the hours of practice that had taught her to trust her instincts. Every note was deliberate yet effortless, a testament to the years of dedication she had poured into her craft. The room, once filled with skepticism and casual chatter, became a space of quiet reverence. Eyes were fixed on her, and ears attuned to every sound. Yet she remained entirely herself, fully absorbed in the music. The guests' initial curiosity turned into admiration, their whispers fading into silence as they realized this was not a casual performance, but a display of true talent. Some leaned closer to catch every detail. Some closed their eyes to feel the music more deeply. She could sense their emotions changing, the way music has a power that words cannot match. Even the manager and staff, who had doubted her, were captivated. Unable to look away or speak, she played on, her heart and mind fully present in the moment. Memories of her life, of struggles, of moments of quiet joy and sorrow, intertwined with the melody. Each chord she struck resonated not only in the room, but within her own being. The music became a narrative, a story of resilience and hidden talent, of a life that had quietly persevered despite being overlooked. She did not think about the applause or recognition. She played because it was the truth of herself, emerging through sound. Time seemed to blur. The piece stretched longer than she had anticipated, yet she did not falter. The audience was enraptured, caught in the spell of her performance. Some had tears in their eyes, some had smiles of astonishment, and some simply listened, unable to comprehend that someone they had barely noticed could produce something so profound. She noticed the subtle reactions, the way the room shifted from polite attention to genuine admiration. It was as if the music had rewritten the space itself, transforming it from an ordinary dinner event into a memorable moment of wonder. When she finally reached the final note, she let it linger, allowing the resonance to fill the room before fading into silence. She opened her eyes and blinked, momentarily disoriented by the intensity of the experience. For a moment, no one spoke. Then slowly, applause began. At first, it was tentative, then it grew louder, stronger, filling the restaurant with a sound that was as powerful as the music she had just played. Guests rose to their feet, clapping and cheering, some calling out words of admiration. The staff, once skeptical, joined in, their smiles wide and genuine, their faces reflecting surprise and respect. She sat there for a moment, letting the applause wash over her, still catching her breath. Her hands hovered over the keys, reluctant to let go of the connection she had just experienced. The manager approached, a mixture of relief and admiration in his eyes, and offered a quiet congratulations. The guests approached one by one, expressing their amazement and appreciation, some even asking how long she had been playing, and others expressing disbelief that they had not known of her talent before. In that moment, something shifted within her. The restaurant, once a place of routine and invisibility, had become a stage where she had shared her true self. The fear and doubt that had weighed on her melted away, replaced by a quiet confidence and a sense of fulfillment she had not felt in years. The piano had called her, and she had answered, revealing a part of herself that had always existed but had never been seen. The night continued, yet the memory of that first performance lingered. She returned to her work with a new sense of presence, noticing the smiles and glances of those who had witnessed her talent. There was a recognition in the air, a subtle acknowledgement that she was more than the apron she wore, more than the role she had assumed. She had shared a gift that had been waiting for the right moment, and that moment had arrived. The music had spoken, and the world had listened, even if only for a few minutes, and she had finally been seen. After that unforgettable evening, life at the restaurant settled back into its familiar rhythm, yet nothing felt quite the same. She moved through the tables with her usual calm, polite demeanor, taking orders and serving food, but inside, her thoughts were alive with the memory of the music she had shared. She kept replaying the notes in her mind, remembering the way her fingers had glided over the keys, the rush of emotion that had surged through her, and the awe on the faces of those who had heard her play. For the first time in years, she felt a spark that she had thought was lost, a sense of purpose and possibility that extended beyond the daily routine. Word of her performance had spread quickly among the staff and regular customers. Whispers of admiration and disbelief followed her through the restaurant, and some of the other employees looked at her differently, as if finally seeing her for who she was. Yet she tried to remain humble and composed, not wanting to let the attention change her. She had always believed that talent was something private, something to be cherished and nurtured quietly, not something to flaunt or boast about. But now, the world seemed to notice, and she had to navigate this new attention with care. Some guests began asking for her specifically when they returned, curious to hear her play again. She felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness at these requests, unsure if she could repeat the magic of that first performance. Each time she approached the piano, she remembered the way her heart had raced and the fear she had felt. But she also remembered the exhilaration, the feeling of becoming completely immersed in something she loved, and that feeling pushed her forward. She continued to serve tables with the same diligence and grace as before, but the piano became a constant presence in her thoughts. Every spare moment, she imagined melodies, created harmonies in her head, and rehearsed pieces silently. She realized that she had been holding back for too long, letting fear and doubt dictate the limits of her life. Now, she felt the desire to reclaim the part of herself that had been hidden, to allow her music to flow freely once more. The restaurant began to consider having her perform more regularly. The manager, impressed by the impact of her first performance, suggested she play at upcoming events. He spoke with her quietly, recognizing the talent she had kept under wraps for years. She listened carefully, feeling both honored and overwhelmed. The thought of playing for an audience on a regular basis was both thrilling and terrifying. She had spent so long in the background, unnoticed, that stepping fully into the spotlight felt almost impossible. Yet deep down, she knew she could do it. The music had never left her. It had only been waiting for the right moment to emerge. Each note she had played that evening was a reminder of her abilities, a confirmation that her years of practice and dedication were not wasted. She realized that the fear she had carried for so long was not stronger than her passion for music, and that realization gave her courage that, in the days that followed, she began to practice more intentionally. The restaurant was not the ideal place for extended practice, but she found quiet moments before opening and after closing, lingering near the piano to reconnect with the instrument she had once known so well. Her fingers remembered the movements, the positions, the subtleties of each piece. She played scales and exercises, recalling techniques that had been ingrained in her over years of dedication. With each practice session, her confidence grew, and the fear that had once held her back began to fade. She also began to think more about the kind of music she wanted to share. Her first performance had been well received, but it had been spontaneous, shaped by impulse and memory. Now, she wanted to create something deliberate, something that reflected her true self. She considered the pieces she had loved as a child, the compositions that had inspired her, and she began to envision new arrangements, new ways of expressing emotion through sound. Her creativity was reignited, and she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Outside the restaurant, she noticed changes in how people treated her. Guests who had once barely acknowledged her presence now greeted her warmly, some expressing admiration for her talent, others simply curious to see her perform again. The staff also began to show more respect, recognizing that she was not just a quiet presence in the background, but a person with extraordinary abilities. She appreciated the acknowledgement, but she remained grounded, focused on her music rather than the praise. The first few times she performed again were nerve-wracking. She worried about mistakes, about failing to meet expectations, about not living up to the memory of her initial performance. But each time she sat at the piano, she reminded herself that the music was about expression, not perfection. She allowed herself to feel the notes, to let her emotions guide her fingers, and gradually the fear melted away. She discovered that performing, even in front of a small audience, was exhilarating, a chance to connect with others in a way that words could never achieve. She also began to form connections with the guests in a new way. Some shared stories of their own experiences with music, expressing gratitude for the beauty she brought into their lives. Others asked questions about her background, curious to learn how someone so talented had remained unnoticed for so long. She answered humbly, sharing only what she felt comfortable with. But each interaction reinforced the sense that she was finally being seen, not just as a waitress, but as a musician with a unique voice. Her life outside the restaurant also began to shift. She found herself thinking about long-term goals and possibilities she had never considered before. She began to dream about performing in other venues, collaborating with other musicians, and even recording her own music. The idea of pursuing music more seriously, of making it a central part of her life rather than a hidden passion, became increasingly appealing. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to take the first steps. Despite the excitement, she remained grounded in the day-to-day reality of her job. She continued to serve tables, take orders, and maintain the smooth operation of the restaurant. But now, each task was imbued with a sense of purpose and anticipation. She moved with a quiet confidence, aware that her talent was no longer a secret, yet mindful of the balance between her responsibilities and her newfound passion. The restaurant itself began to benefit from her performances. Regular guests returned more often, curious to hear her play, and new patrons were drawn by word of mouth. Special events became more memorable, with her music adding a unique and personal touch. The management recognized the value she brought, not just in her service, but in the atmosphere she helped create. She was becoming an integral part of the restaurant's identity, and the recognition, though subtle, was meaningful. Her relationship with the piano deepened. Each session, each performance, strengthened the bond between her and the instrument. She explored new styles and techniques, experimenting with dynamics, tempo, and expression. She discovered that she could convey complex emotions through subtle shifts in touch and phrasing, and that each piece she played could tell a story beyond words. Music became both a refuge and a medium for connection, a way to communicate with others and with herself in a language that transcended everyday conversation. As her confidence grew, she began to share more of herself through her performances. She experimented with improvisation, blending familiar melodies with her own interpretations, creating unique pieces that reflected her personality and experiences. The audience responded with enthusiasm, drawn not only to her technical skill, but to the emotion and authenticity she brought to each performance. She realized that music was not just about technique. It was about connection, about touching hearts and minds in ways that words could not. She also became more aware of the impact her music had on those around her. Guests would pause mid-conversation, captivated by the melodies, and staff would watch in admiration, inspired by her talent and dedication. She saw how music could transform the atmosphere, bringing a sense of calm, joy, or reflection to the room. This realization reinforced her desire to continue performing, to share her gift not for recognition or reward, but for the simple and profound joy of creating something beautiful. The journey was not without challenges. She still faced moments of self-doubt, moments when fear threatened to overwhelm her, moments when the weight of her responsibilities as a waitress seemed incompatible with her passion for music. But each time, she returned to the piano, reminded of the strength and talent that had always been within her. She learned to trust herself, to embrace imperfection, and to find courage in the act of creating. The music became a source of resilience, a reminder that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. In her quiet moments, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the years spent unnoticed, the sacrifices made to survive and support herself, and the secret life of music that had sustained her. She realized that those experiences had shaped her, given her depth, empathy, and perspective. They had prepared her for this moment, allowing her to step into the light with authenticity and confidence. She understood that her past, while challenging, was an integral part of who she had become, and that her music was a testament to her resilience and determination. The restaurant had grown quieter in the late evening, the clinking of dishes replaced by a softer, more reflective atmosphere. She moved between the tables as usual, attentive and polite, but her mind was still alive with music. It had become a constant presence in her thoughts, a companion she could never fully ignore. Tonight, she felt a sense of anticipation building inside her, a quiet excitement she could not explain. Something told her that the piano would call to her again, that the music she loved so deeply was waiting for another chance to emerge. The manager approached, a note of cautious hope in his voice. There was a small gathering of guests in the private dining area, he explained, and they had requested some live music. The pianist had been delayed, and he wondered if she could play again. Her heart raced at the suggestion. She had performed before, yes, but each time brought its own uncertainty and pressure. Still, there was a thrill in the idea, a chance to let the music speak once more. She nodded quietly, accepting the invitation, and followed him to the corner of the restaurant, where the piano waited as she approached the instrument. The memories of her previous performance flooded back. She remembered the fear, the hesitation, the first tentative notes, and the way the room had fallen silent in awe. That moment had changed something inside her, a realization that she could step beyond the confines of her job and share her true self with the world. She placed her hands on the keys, feeling the familiar texture beneath her fingers, and drew a deep breath. This time, she felt steadier, more certain, though the butterflies in her stomach reminded her that the stakes were real. The guests had begun to notice her presence, some exchanging curious glances, others whispering quietly. The staff lingered nearby, uncertain of what to expect, but hoping for the same magic as before. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting the tension settle, focusing only on the connection between her fingers and the piano. The first note rang out softly, a gentle introduction, and she allowed the music to unfold naturally from there. The sound filled the room, gentle at first, and growing with emotion and complexity. She felt herself slipping into a state she had known only when fully immersed in music. The room, the guests, the staff, none of it mattered anymore. There was only the piano, the melody, and the feeling of expression that had always defined her relationship with music. Each note was deliberate, yet it flowed effortlessly, guided by intuition and years of practice. She explored the piece with subtle variations, adding her own touches, allowing emotion to guide the rhythm and phrasing. The music became an extension of her thoughts and feelings, a way to communicate without words. The guests leaned forward, drawn in by the depth and nuance of her playing. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, while others watched in silent admiration. She could sense their engagement, the way each person was touched differently by the notes she played. It was a powerful reminder of why she had devoted so much of her life to music, even when it had seemed impossible to pursue. The connection she felt in that moment was both humbling and exhilarating. Her fingers moved with increasing confidence and grace. She experimented with dynamics, allowing the piece to rise and fall with emotion, creating tension and release that kept the listeners captivated. Each chord and arpeggio seemed to tell a story, a reflection of her journey from invisibility to recognition, from self-doubt to courage. The piano became a mirror of her inner world, and the audience, willingly or not, became part of that story. She felt a deep satisfaction in the act of sharing herself in such a direct, meaningful way. The staff, who had once been skeptical, watched in awe. They had seen her work diligently behind the scenes, always quiet and unassuming, and now they were witnessing the full extent of her talent. Their respect grew, as did their appreciation for the hidden depths that could exist in someone they had previously overlooked. The manager, standing nearby, felt a sense of pride mixed with amazement, realizing that this quiet, diligent employee had such extraordinary abilities. The atmosphere in the restaurant shifted, the usual hum of activity replaced by focused attention on the music that flowed so naturally from her as she continued. She allowed herself to take risks, to explore the piano in ways she had not done for years. She introduced subtle improvisations, weaving new melodies into familiar patterns, creating textures that were uniquely her own. The audience responded intuitively, some leaning closer to catch the nuances, others swaying slightly with the rhythm, all fully absorbed. It was a dialogue without words, a silent conversation that transcended ordinary interaction. She felt a deep satisfaction in the exchange, the invisible threads that connected her to the listeners through sound and emotion. Time seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously. She lost track of minutes, absorbed in the flow of the music and the responses it elicited. The room was transformed, no longer a simple dining space, but a vessel for shared experience. Each note, each chord, was a small act of courage and expression, and each listener became part of the unfolding narrative. She realized that performing was not simply about displaying skill. It was about creating a space where people could feel, reflect, and connect through something intangible yet profoundly real. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment as she navigated the piece. The technical challenges that had once intimidated her now seemed like opportunities to express more fully. She moved fluidly, confident in her abilities, yet always aware of the subtleties that made the performance unique. She could sense the audience's engagement, the way their attention sharpened with each crescendo and softened with each delicate passage. The music became a bridge, connecting her experience with theirs, a shared moment of beauty and emotion. When she reached the final notes, she let them linger, allowing the sound to resonate throughout the room. She opened her eyes slowly, taking in the expressions of the listeners. There was awe, admiration, and a sense of connection that transcended mere politeness. The silence that followed was filled with meaning, a collective acknowledgement of the extraordinary talent she had revealed. Then, gradually, applause began, first hesitant, then building into a warm, enthusiastic ovation. Guests rose to their feet, clapping and cheering, some with tears in their eyes, others smiling broadly. The staff joined in, their faces reflecting pride and amazement. She allowed herself a quiet smile, a mix of relief and satisfaction. The fear and doubt that had accompanied her to the piano melted away in the warmth of recognition. The music had spoken, and the listeners had responded. She felt a profound sense of accomplishment, not for the applause or acknowledgement, but for the act of expressing herself fully, honestly, and courageously. It was a reaffirmation of her identity, a reminder that she was not limited by circumstance, role, or expectation. The manager approached, his eyes bright with admiration. He offered congratulations, acknowledging the impact of her performance and suggesting that they schedule more live music sessions with her in the future. She listened, grateful for the opportunity, but also aware that the real reward had already been realized in the act of playing itself. She had reclaimed a part of herself that had been dormant for years, and that alone was transformative. Guests approached, expressing their amazement and curiosity. Some asked about her training, others about her favorite pieces, and a few simply wanted to thank her for sharing such a powerful experience. She answered humbly, sharing her story in a way that was honest yet restrained, mindful of maintaining her privacy while connecting authentically. Each interaction reinforced the idea that her music had impact, that it could reach and touch people in ways beyond her own imagination. After the guests returned to their conversations, she remained at the piano for a moment, letting the silence settle. The room had changed. It carried a sense of shared experience that lingered long after the notes had faded. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from years of quiet dedication and hidden talent to this moment of connection and recognition. The piano had been a witness, a partner, and a conduit for her voice, allowing her to express what words could not. The evening continued, but she felt a new sense of presence and possibility. Each step she took through the restaurant carried a quiet confidence, a sense of being fully herself in a world that had long overlooked her. She knew there would be challenges ahead, moments of doubt and uncertainty, but she also knew that the music was a part of her, a constant source of strength, joy, and fulfillment. She felt empowered, ready to embrace opportunities, and open to the ways her talent could shape her life and the lives of those around her. In the days that followed, she noticed subtle changes in how people perceived her. Staff and guests alike treated her with greater respect, recognizing not just her competence in her job, but the depth of her abilities and the richness of her inner life. Invitations to perform at small gatherings and private events became more frequent, and she approached each one with a mixture of excitement and humility. She learned to balance her responsibilities as a waitress with her growing role as a musician, finding harmony between work and passion. Through it all, she remained grounded in her love for music. She practiced, experimented, and created, exploring new melodies and refining her skills. Each says. The restaurant had taken on a new energy after her performances. The atmosphere was different, lighter and more attentive, and she felt the subtle shift in the way both staff and guests interacted with her. She still moved quietly among the tables, taking orders, serving dishes, and ensuring that every guest was attended to. But there was a new awareness in their eyes, a recognition that went beyond her role as a waitress. Her talent had changed the way people perceived her, and she could feel the subtle respect in the gestures, the polite inquiries, the moments when someone paused to watch her work, even as she carried on with her duties. Her thoughts often wandered back to the piano. Each spare moment she found herself near it, running her fingers over the keys, remembering melodies and inventing new ones. She practiced quietly, experimenting with harmonies, dynamics, and variations, exploring the depth of her own creativity. The piano had become not just an instrument, but a companion, a space where she could fully express herself, away from the expectations and routines of everyday life. Her music was no longer hidden. It had a purpose and an audience, and that gave her courage she had not known before. Requests for her to play became more frequent, and she found herself performing for small gatherings, private events, and even regular dining hours. Each time, she felt a mix of nerves and exhilaration, the familiar tension that came with performing in front of others. But unlike the first times, she now embraced the feeling, understanding that it was part of the experience. She allowed herself to connect with the listeners, to feel their reactions, and to let the music flow naturally from her heart. Each performance was unique, shaped by the moment, the audience, and her own emotions. She noticed the changes in herself as well. Confidence began to grow, not just in her playing, but in the way she carried herself in every aspect of life. She walked taller, spoke with more assurance, and allowed herself to engage more openly with others. The music had opened a door, not only to external recognition, but to a deeper understanding of her own capabilities. She realized that the years she had spent unnoticed and underestimated had not diminished her. They had prepared her, strengthened her, and made her more resilient. The guests responded with warmth and admiration. Many returned specifically to hear her play, curious to experience the emotion and depth that her music brought to the room. Some offered kind words and encouragement, while others shared their own stories of passion and creativity. She listened attentively, appreciating the human connection that music could create, the way it could bridge gaps and touch hearts without the need for words. These interactions reinforced her sense of purpose, reminding her that her talent was meant to be shared, not kept hidden. Her colleagues also began to see her differently. They respected her not only for her work ethic, but for the remarkable skills she had revealed. She became an inspiration, a quiet reminder that talent could exist in unexpected places, and that diligence, humility, and perseverance could coexist with extraordinary ability. Some of them even sought her guidance or advice, curious to understand the discipline and dedication behind her performances. She offered support and encouragement, happy to share what she could while maintaining her own humility. Outside the restaurant, she began to imagine new possibilities. She considered performing in other venues, collaborating with other musicians, and even exploring recording opportunities. The thought of expanding her musical journey filled her with excitement and anticipation. She understood that such opportunities would require courage and effort, but she felt ready to face the challenges. Her past experiences had taught her patience, persistence, and resilience, qualities that would serve her well as she ventured into new territory. she also began to explore her own creative voice more fully. Improvisation became a regular part of her practice, allowing her to express emotions and ideas spontaneously. She experimented with different styles, blending classical elements with contemporary influences, discovering new ways to communicate through sound. Each session at the piano was both a practice and a discovery, an opportunity to refine her technique while exploring the limitless possibilities of musical expression. She felt invigorated by the freedom to create, the thrill of inventing something uniquely her own. The more she performed, the more she realized the impact her music had on people. Guests would pause in the middle of conversation, captivated by the melodies. Staff would stop and listen, drawn into the experience. Some would close their eyes, letting the music wash over them, while others would nod subtly, acknowledging the connection without words. She understood that music had a power that transcended ordinary communication, a power to evoke emotion, reflection, and connection. This realization deepened her commitment to sharing her gift, knowing that each performance had the potential to touch someone's heart. There were moments of self-doubt, of course. She still questioned whether she was truly capable of pursuing music beyond the restaurant, whether her skills were enough, and whether the world would accept her talent on a larger stage. These doubts were natural, she told herself, and she learned to face them with patience and determination. She reminded herself that each performance, each practice session, was a step forward, a reaffirmation of her abilities, and a preparation for the challenges ahead. The music became both a refuge and a guide, helping her navigate uncertainty with grace and confidence. She also reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The years of quiet work, unnoticed by many, had shaped her character, instilled discipline, and strengthened her resilience. The sacrifices she had made, the patience she had exercised, and the dreams she had held on to quietly had all contributed to her growth. She realized that her past, while challenging, had not been wasted. It had prepared her for this moment, allowing her to step fully into her talent with authenticity and confidence. She understood that her story was one of perseverance, dedication, and the quiet power of hidden potential. The piano itself had become a central part of her life, a trusted companion and a source of inspiration. She spent time exploring its full range, experimenting with dynamics, expression, and nuance. Each note she played was infused with intention, each phrase crafted with care and emotion. The instrument responded to her touch, echoing her thoughts and feelings, becoming an extension of her inner world. She felt a profound connection to it, a sense of partnership and understanding that transcended simple mechanics. Her connection with the audience deepened as well. She learned to read subtle cues, to sense shifts in attention and emotion, and to adjust her playing accordingly. She discovered that performance was not only about technical skill, but about empathy and communication, about creating an experience that resonated with listeners. Each interaction, each response, reinforced the idea that music was a living, dynamic exchange, a bridge between individuals that could convey meaning and emotion beyond words. As she continued to perform, she also began to plan for the future more deliberately. She considered opportunities for further study, collaboration, and even public performances beyond the restaurant. The thought of pursuing music as a central part of her life no longer seemed distant or impossible. She recognized that the first step was always the hardest, but she felt ready to take it, equipped with experience, skill, and the confidence that came from sharing her gift with others. She understood that the journey would be long and challenging, but also deeply rewarding. Through it all, she remained grounded and humble. She knew that talent alone was not enough. Dedication, practice, and emotional authenticity were equally important. She continued to balance her work at the restaurant with her musical pursuits, finding harmony between responsibility and passion. She understood that her role as a waitress provided stability and routine, while her music provided fulfillment and expression. The balance was delicate, but she embraced it, recognizing the value in both aspects of her life. The experience also deepened her appreciation for human connection. She observed how music could create bonds between strangers, evoke empathy, and foster understanding. She realized that her performances were not just about self-expression, but about creating shared experiences that touched others in meaningful ways. This understanding motivated her to continue exploring, refining, and sharing her music, knowing that it had the power to inspire, comfort, and uplift. Each day, she approached the piano with renewed energy and purpose. She experimented with new techniques, composed original pieces, and revisited old favorites with fresh interpretation. Her skills continued to grow, and her confidence strengthened with each session. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction in the act of creation, a joy that was independent of recognition or reward. The music itself was enough, a source of fulfillment and identity that could not be diminished by circumstance or doubt. She also learned to embrace imperfection, understanding that music was as much about feeling and expression as it was about precision. Mistakes became opportunities for discovery, unexpected turns in the melody that added depth and character. She realized that true artistry lay not in flawlessness, but in authenticity, in the willingness to reveal oneself through sound, and in the courage to share that revelation with others. This insight transformed her. The morning began quietly, with the soft light filtering through the windows and the faint hum of activity in the kitchen. She arrived early, as usual, moving through the restaurant with practiced ease. Yet her mind was already occupied with music. The piano waited in the corner, silent and patient, a companion that had become central to her life. Today felt different, a sense of anticipation that she could not quite define. It was a mixture of excitement and calm, a readiness to embrace whatever came next. The previous weeks had been transformative. She had performed multiple times, each experience reinforcing her confidence and connection to the music. Guests returned specifically to hear her play, staff treated her with new respect, and the manager had quietly suggested that her performances become a regular feature of the restaurant. Yet, even with all the external recognition, she remained grounded. The joy she felt came from the act of playing, from expressing herself fully through the piano, rather than from applause or acknowledgement. Today, a small group had requested a private performance for a luncheon. She prepared quietly, reviewing the pieces she would play and allowing herself to breathe through the familiar nerves that came before any performance. She knew that each session was an opportunity not only to showcase skill, but to connect, to convey emotion, and to create a shared experience that went beyond words. She approached the piano, settling onto the bench and feeling the keys beneath her fingers. The familiar texture brought a sense of calm and focus. The first notes were soft, deliberate, and steady. She allowed herself to feel the music, to let it guide her fingers and shape the melody. Each chord resonated, carrying with it the weight of experience, the lessons learned from years of hidden practice, and the emotion of a journey that had been both challenging and rewarding. The audience listened quietly, their attention drawn to the flow of sound, their eyes reflecting curiosity, admiration, and wonder. As she played, she felt herself fully immersed in the moment. The past, with all its struggles and quiet perseverance, had led to this point. She remembered the first time she had been asked, almost jokingly, to play at the restaurant, and how uncertain and afraid she had been. Now she felt confidence, grounded in skill and the knowledge that her music had value and power. The fear that had once held her back was replaced by a sense of purpose and fulfillment. The room seemed to shrink around the music, the atmosphere charged with quiet attention. Guests leaned forward, some closing their eyes to focus solely on the sound, while others watched her hands move across the keys with admiration. The staff, once skeptical and amused, stood nearby, captivated by the emotion and mastery in her performance. She had become more than a waitress. She was a musician, a storyteller, a conduit for expression that touched everyone who listened. She explored the piece with both technical precision and emotional depth, allowing her fingers to convey subtle nuances and shifts in feeling. Improvisation became a natural part of the process, weaving personal touches and spontaneous variations into familiar melodies. Each note was intentional, yet it flowed freely, capturing the complexity and beauty of human experience. She realized that the act of playing had become more than performance. It was a form of communication, a way to express thoughts and feelings that words could not contain. Throughout the performance, she remained aware of the reactions around her. The audience's engagement was palpable, an unspoken connection that bound them together in the shared experience of music. She noticed subtle changes in posture, the gentle inclinations of heads, the soft expressions of wonder and reflection. These signals reinforced the idea that music could bridge gaps, convey emotion, and create moments of intimacy and understanding between strangers. She also reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. Years of quiet dedication, unnoticed skill, and perseverance had all led to this moment of expression and recognition. The challenges she had faced, the self-doubt she had overcome, and the patience she had cultivated were all reflected in the depth and clarity of her music. She understood that her talent was not merely a gift, but a product of persistence, practice, and resilience. This awareness gave her a sense of pride that was quiet yet profound, a recognition of her own growth and strength. The performance continued, each piece flowing into the next seamlessly. She experimented with tempo, dynamics, and expression, allowing the music to breathe and evolve. Her hands moved with confidence and sensitivity, translating emotion into sound with skill and grace. The audience responded intuitively, absorbed by the music and the presence she brought to the piano. There was a sense of shared space, a connection forged through melody and rhythm. That made the experience both personal and communal. As the final piece approached, she allowed herself to fully embrace the emotion it carried. The music swelled, a culmination of the journey she had taken from invisibility to recognition, from fear to courage. Each note resonated with authenticity, carrying the weight of experience and the hope for the future. She felt a deep satisfaction, knowing that she was sharing not only technical skill, but the essence of herself, her story, and her spirit through sound. When the last note lingered and faded, the room remained silent for a heartbeat, as if savoring the conclusion. Then applause erupted, warm and enthusiastic, filling the space with appreciation and admiration. Guests rose to their feet, some clapping fervently, others nodding in acknowledgement of the beauty they had just experienced. The staff joined in, their faces bright with pride and surprise. She allowed herself a quiet smile, grateful for the acknowledgement yet aware that the true reward was the music itself. The act of expression and connection it had facilitated. The manager approached afterward, his eyes reflecting both pride and admiration. He praised her performance and suggested that her music be a more central feature of the restaurant, recognizing the unique atmosphere it created. She listened humbly, understanding the opportunity, but also appreciating the true significance of what had happened. She had found her voice and shared it with authenticity. The recognition was meaningful, but it was the experience of performing, of creating, that held the greatest value. Guests approached to express their amazement, sharing their feelings and appreciation. Some spoke of being moved, others of being inspired, and a few shared personal stories of their own experiences with music. She listened attentively, grateful for the human connection her music had fostered. Each conversation reinforced her understanding of the power of music, not merely as entertainment, but as a medium for empathy, reflection, and emotional connection. She realized that every note she played had the potential to touch someone's life. even in subtle ways. After the guests returned to their meals and conversations, she remained at the piano for a moment, letting the silence settle. She reflected on the journey, the growth, and the discovery that had led her to this point. The piano had become a companion, a source of comfort, a means of expression, and a way to connect with the world. She had transformed fear into courage, hesitation into confidence, and quiet potential into a visible, meaningful presence. She understood that the journey was ongoing, but she felt ready to face whatever came next. In the days that followed, she continued to perform, each session reinforcing her connection to music and her audience. The restaurant became a place where patrons could experience beauty and emotion, a space elevated by her talent and presence. She continued to balance her work as a waitress with her musical endeavors, maintaining the humility and dedication that had always defined her character. Yet, within this balance, she found fulfillment, purpose, and the joy of sharing her gift. She also began to think about long-term possibilities. The idea of performing beyond the restaurant, collaborating with other musicians, or exploring recording opportunities became more real and attainable. She recognized that pursuing these paths would require courage and effort, but she felt equipped to meet the challenges. The foundation she had built through years of practice, perseverance, and experience gave her confidence that she could succeed and continue to grow. Her understanding of music deepened as well. She realized that performance was not only about skill, but about empathy, storytelling, and emotional resonance. Each audience was different, each moment unique, and each performance a chance to create a shared experience that transcended ordinary communication. She approached each session with this awareness, allowing the music to flow naturally while remaining attuned to the impact it had on listeners. This mindset transformed her playing, bringing authenticity, depth, and subtlety to every note. Through her growth and continued exploration, she discovered a profound sense of purpose. Music was not only a reflection of her inner life, but a bridge to others, a way to inspire, comfort, and connect. Each performance became an act of generosity, a contribution to the shared human experience. She felt grateful for the opportunity to express herself fully, to share her talent, and to create moments of beauty that would linger in the hearts of those who listened. She reflected on the journey with a sense of quiet satisfaction. The years of unnoticed talent, perseverance, and dedication had led to this point, a life where she could embrace her passion openly and fully. She had transformed fear into confidence, hid